So, happy Taco Tuesday, YouTube. Here I was trying to just do my job and test my internet speed, and I ran into this. And normally I am not one to get very political, but I couldn't help but notice this rather hilarious ad from Mike Bloomberg, whoever the heck he is. No, I'm just kidding. I know who he is, but no more guns in schools ever. Okay, Mike, I would be very, very fascinated how you plan on getting that done. I really hope people aren't silly enough to actually believe this. And I do realize in this country, violence in general, gun violence in particular, is a real issue. And no, I'm not a member of the NRA. I don't even own a freaking firearm. I never have owned a firearm in my life. Unless you count a rust bucket of an old Ruger pistol that is completely non-functional that I had at one point, that was effectively a paperweight. Was never able to fire in all the time that I owned it. I literally just found it and kept it, and it was a paperweight. So I don't have anybody's axe to grind in the whole gun rights community, but I do believe in freedom, and I do believe in the Constitution. And the Constitution, last I checked, had this little blurb in there in the Second Amendment, something about shall not be infringed. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Well, here's the thing. No more guns in schools ever. First of all, that's an impossibility. You can't stop people from just bringing a firearm. The only way you could stop guns from being in schools is if you stopped guns from being in this country. And whether you want that to happen or not is irrelevant, because it will never happen. It's impossible. It's a 100% impossibility for the United States to just decide, oh, psych, we don't want guns anymore. It's not going to happen, guys. I mean, like I said, I don't have anybody's axe to grind in this discussion. I'm not registered as a Republican or a Democrat. I'm registered no party. I already mentioned it, but I guess it's worth repeating. I'm not a member of the NRA. I have no intention of joining the NRA. I suppose you probably, to join the National Rifle Association, probably should own a firearm, and since I don't, they probably wouldn't consider me eligible for membership, I'm guessing. But here's the thing. Despite the fact that we do have a violence issue in this country, and it's not just a gun violence issue, and human beings throughout history and in the modern day, we've proven ourselves very capable of committing violent acts with or without firearms. Fun fact, karate in Japan was invented by people who wanted to commit violent acts who didn't have access to any sort of weaponry. Hence why it relies on punches and kicks and not on swords and firearms or anything of that sort. So here's the thing. The only country, and it's also worth mentioning, now, since I mentioned Japan, I guess I should also mention countries where, maybe some sort of heavy gun restrictions have been maybe kind of sort of successful. The only countries I am aware of is Great Britain and Japan. And you know what both of them have in common? They're islands. It's a little easier to enforce gun control when everything has to be brought in by a plane or a boat. Nothing can cross overland into your country from other countries. So that's the only places where it's really been effective. And again, this is really transcends whether or not you support gun control or you're against it, or you're kind of somewhere in between where you want some amount of gun control. Me personally, I want some reasonable amount of gun controls, because the truth of the matter is firearms technology has progressed far beyond what the original writers of the Constitution could have possibly imagined. No matter what you want to say about that, people said, oh, well, long-range firearms existed, repeating firearms existed in the Revolutionary War, and they did, but nothing like what we have nowadays, and nothing like what we have even accessible to civilians in our modern day. So when I can go down to Texas and I can purchase a firearm, a sniper rifle, from some of the arms dealers down there that can, reliably hit targets at greater than 1,000 yards. That really, I don't think that there's any possibility that George Washington or Benjamin Franklin or any of those other guys, Hamilton, Jefferson, I don't think there's any way that any of those guys could have imagined that we would have a firearm with that kind of capability to put a killing shot, into a, into an animal if you're hunting, or presumably into a person as well at that kind of range. 1,000 yards is you're talking 3,000 feet. It's nearly a mile, and of course if you really were trained, you could probably hit targets much greater range than that. But I'm just putting a roundabout figure on it. If you have a pretty hefty amount of skill with a sniper rifle, if you have a more capable rifle, or if you have a much greater amount of skill, you can probably hit things at closer to a mile. That's not something they could have possibly imagined. At that time, even the 6-pound cannons that were present on their sailing ships would really have a hard time hitting a target at greater than a mile range. And I'm not sure if they were even capable of reaching that kind of range. The round might fly that far, and it and very often could, but actually hitting something at that kind of range, let alone hitting a man-sized target. Of course, hitting a man-sized target would have been out of the question. Hitting a ship that's 150 feet long would be nearly out of the question, probably at greater than a mile range. So my point in this is we do, I feel, need some reasonable amount of gun control. But guys like Mike Bloomberg, with his statements, no more guns in schools ever, Mike will get it done. Actually, that's a pretty catchy slogan, Mike. But the thing is that it will never happen. It's an impossibility. So him stating that is one of two things. He's either exciting a very extreme form of gun control, which is unhealthy in this country. We don't need that kind of division because, as I mentioned, the only way to not have any guns in schools is to completely outlaw guns in this country, and that will never happen. There's something like 100 million registered firearms owners, and collectively they own about 200 million guns. And those are the ones we know about. And of course, being Americans, there's probably a lot of people who aren't registered firearms owner who nonetheless own firearms. But let's just go off of the numbers we know, right? There's about 200 million firearms out there. You're never going to outlaw guns in this country. You're never going to outlaw, even if you wanted to say, okay, we're going to outlaw assault rifles. Well, we can't even freaking define what an assault rifle is at this point. So, we're not going to, at this point in the near future, at least, we're not going to be able to pull off a ban on assault rifles because we can't even dig up an accurate definition of one at this point. And even if you could, honestly, I'll be really honest with you all. And I'm from California. I'm from the states with some of the heftiest gun controls in existence. And even then, I have to look at the real truth. And the technology nowadays, I think, has progressed beyond what at least any of our current gun control laws could possibly keep up with. We're just so far beyond that. I think, when you can. You can 3D print an entire firearm nowadays, and that's, granted they're not, anything close to military grade, of course, but they are firearms, and they are operational firearms that can be 3D printed. What are you gonna do? Ban 3D printers, Mike? You're gonna stop people from being able to purchase 3D printers? Well, maybe you can ban domestic production of 3D printers, but then people will just buy them from overseas and ship it in a box and call it something else than a 3D printer. And people do that all the time with a lot of other things. So point being is, with Mike Bloomberg making this statement, it's, as I said, one of two things. He's either trying to stir up a very extreme form of gun control, which is going to cause a lot of division, or it's really just a marketing sales pitch type thing. I hope no one is stupid enough to really buy into that either way, because it's never going to happen. It's unfortunate that we do have the violence that we have, but really, the violent behavior goes much deeper than just a gun. It goes so far beyond that. In Japan, they've I don't know if they've completely outlawed guns, but they have very, very heavy restrictions. Well, people still go at each other, with knives and swords, or like I mentioned with the karate comment, they still go at each other with their fists, and there's still a good deal of violence in Japan. Mexico has all but outlawed guns. Mexico at the moment only has one licensed gun retailer in the entire country, and it's located on a military base. And I don't think I need to mention how much freaking violence there is in Mexico. It's an incredibly violent place. So is Central America, but Mexico is a very violent. There's a great deal of violence that happens, and if anything, their citizens not really having an effective way to arm themselves probably makes it worse. Another point in case would be, and you can look this up for yourself if you want to verify the facts, but one of the safest nations, not the safest, but one of the safest nations, I mean, it's way up there in the list of safest countries to live in, is Switzerland. That's where part of my family's from. And in that country, every, I believe it's every male citizen, every head of household, and I don't know how they define that, but every male head of household, however that is defined, head of household. But every male head of household in Switzerland is required to undergo firearms training, as well as to own and maintain a working firearm. So every dude is armed over there, essentially, is what that means. And it's one of the safest countries in the world. So I don't think safety, because really that's really what people want, right? People want to feel safe. They want to feel secure. But I don't think that safety is just a matter of whether we have firearms available to, the general public, or we don't. Because there are countries that don't have a high percentage of firearms ownership, and they're relatively safe countries. Great Britain is probably a good example of that. Maybe Australia might be as well. But then at the same time, there are countries that, like Mexico, that also don't have a high percentage of of citizens owning guns, and they're incredibly unsafe countries. And then on the other hand, there's always the Switzerlands of the world, where a lot of people do own guns, and they are safe countries. So it's really a bigger and more complex topic than that, and I don't really appreciate guys like Mike Bloomberg trying to, use this whole issue as sort of a sales pitch, or whatever his angle is on that. It's not a good angle, and it's misleading, and it's just plain lying, because he's trying to promise something that I assume he has the brains to know will never happen, and I hope that the voting public out there has the brains to know will never happen. It's impossible, and this topic cannot be, it is not something that can be solved that easily. It is also something that is far more complex than men like Mike Bloomberg and those who support him would have you to believe. So that's my take on it. I don't normally get political on this channel, but I just felt the need. Like I said, I was really just trying to test my internet speed, and I saw that rather ridiculous ad from Mike Bloomberg and felt the need to say something. And so happy Taco Tuesday, everyone. And that was an email from Mark. I probably should get back to work.